Good evening, everyone. Is it loud enough? From the bottom of my heart, as well as my sister Jennifer and my brother Dennis and my mom, Mary Ellen, we want to thank all of you for being here tonight, for being here today, for being here throughout the last few weeks, for being with Dad, if you were able, over the last 46 years. And that's why this room is full, is because of those 46 years. So we thought we'd open up time for people to get up and say a few words, give a few thoughts, and leave us with some good feelings about Dad to add to our memories for him. He would be so proud and so happy to have all of you around him. And he is at peace, and he can see now. and he can hear. Boy, talk about his nemesis, that eyesight. Anyway, we're not having numbers or drawing numbers. It's just, whoever stands up, come on, and then whoever next, and we'll just, this is kind of an open mic night. So, but my family appreciates all of you. I thank you.
I'm Jerry Such, and I'm a recovering alcoholic. Good to see all of you here, and good to have the family and those who loved Howie. I was thinking about a couple of things, and thinking about Howie coming to our retreat over in Grand Haven when we had it there. Before that, it was Holland, and Howie always had just a real good sense of humor. He could really summarize what people had said and come up with a theme for the retreat, and really spent time with the new guys also, and let them know that he cared. Howie was just that kind of individual. Howie and I had a couple things in common. I'm legally blind, and so was Howie. We commiserated about that on occasions, and I'm hard of hearing also. got some hearing problems, so he and I would bitch about those issues at times, and about those people that didn't understand. One of the things I was thinking about Howie when we were at the retreat, there was a good friend of ours, Gary, who couldn't come to the retreat one year, and I called Gary and told him that we missed him, and we were with him. His sister-in-law was having brain surgery, so Gary was there with his wife and with the sister-in-law. So I gave the phone to Howie, and he was speaking to Gary, and he said, God damn it, Gary, it's really just damn inconsiderate of your sister-in-law, to have brain surgery at this point. Tell her next time she needs to schedule it at a different time than when our retreat is. Howie just, he just had a fantastic sense of humor. Obviously some sarcasm there, but Gary and Howie had a lot in common and knew each other. Howie and I were good friends, and we spent some time together. Not nearly as much time as Mark and some of the other guys, but I was there as much as I could be, with my wife and my own situation. But I'm just real glad to be able to have an opportunity to come up here and to say a few words about Howie, and he will be missed.
Thank you.
You know, a man's got to do what a man's got to do. And don't believe anything anybody shows you, or don't believe anything they tell you. They can even mess it up with the pictures nowadays. So even if they got a picture of me, I didn't do it. Mark Fales just come up here to talk a little bit about Howie and how much I've gotten to, love the man and get to know him over the years. Howie and I did a lot of road tripping together, and he's probably got as many miles logged in my Tahoe as anybody else that I know. And how many times we picked him up in 7 bottles of oxygen and that he never used, I remember Howie, he'd say, "Well, if they got to take me 5 years early, that's fine. I'm not using that oxygen." And then he'd get out of breath and he'd want to know where the oxygen was, just like clockwork. That's my guy Howie, and an accomplished man. I was thinking a lot about Howie in the last few days, and this guy, from what I knew of him, accomplished musician, finished carpenter, artist, and from what I understand, quite a booze salesman, and a success on anybody's standards. The man loved his life and loved life, and on a lot of our trips we took together, he spoke incredibly fondly of his family, proudly of his family, his wife and his daughters and his grandchildren and his son-in-laws and all that, he just loved his life. And I know every time it seemed that life would kind of step away from him a little bit, I remember Howie might be the only guy I know that ever went to the library for the blind by driving his own car. And a couple times he called and said he couldn't see well enough to find his way back home again, and that kind of thing. But courageous man, and that's just one of the funny things about how much that man lived life and didn't mind, had a love for everybody, just had a love for life, and his friends that he's had and that we've met over the years, and gosh, he even had the art studio. I think the Auburn Art Studio. Yeah, I went to see the Auburn artist a few times, and in fact helped move a few things down there and stuff, and a few things back on. But a courageous move to do that. So Howie, to me, in this place, I know Howie's in a great place today. And yes, he can see, and yes, he can hear, and yes, he can walk. And I bet you he ain't fell down in a couple days. And I know he's just out there. Heaven's a better place today because Howie's there. And so I love Howie a lot. But I know he's in a good place today. And I'm not going to miss Howie because he's a part of me. I mean, I think about Howie, and he's more alive today than he was a week ago, in my mind, the way I know Howie. And I think about Howie a lot. And, I came across a saying a few years ago, and I put it on a card that are with his flowers from our group in my basement on Thursday nights, where Howie was there many, many times. But it says that nobody's ever really gone until the last person on earth quits thinking about him. And I said on the card, you got a long way to go. But by the looks of all the folks I see here tonight, it's going to be a long time before nobody's thinking about Howie. And fond memories. But that didn't mean Howie couldn't give it to you sometimes either. He could tell you what's happening, what ought to be happening, what didn't happen, that should have happened, and all that kind of stuff. Wonderful man, kind-hearted, kind man, a gentleman, a real gentleman. And and I'll miss some of those times. But I had the honor to, together with my dear friend and brother Denny Baratona, to take Howie to his last retreat. And so we took him down to Bedford, Indiana, which is way out in the sticks. If you listen real carefully, you can hear the banjos out there. That's how far. But it was a great retreat, and Howie couldn't see. He couldn't hear. He always used to say, "There'll be no mumbling." Okay, and most people be talking just about as they tell me I got an outdoor voice and I ought not bring it indoors or something, but he'd say no mumbling, and people have to speak up and talk about what they need to talk about. And Howie was on his game at that retreat, and there'll be some young guys down there that'll remember their time with Howie in Bedford, Indiana at the retreat. But what a great trip! And on the way back, we had to stop at Tony Paco's in Toledo for chili dogs, and I introduced Howie to deep fried pickles, and those are pretty good. He said he liked those quite a bit. I could go on and on. There's a lot of people that are here, but I love that man dearly. I love his family. I mean, the things that you've invited me to, the surprise birthday party at the lake. Who was that? I can't remember who's.
Yeah, that was his 60th at Lower Straits.
And he was so surprised he couldn't catch his breath.
No, he couldn't.
And he was breathing good back then.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, he was totally
When
shocked.
you saw red?
Yeah, he was. And it was Howie at a loss for words. Now, that should have been cataloged somewhere. And then in the backyard down below at the last one I was at.
My sister.
Yeah. And what a beautiful thing the family has done. And I got to tell you, as I get a little older, I make sure that my sons and daughters know just how you took care of Howie. Because. I mean, that was just about perfect. I think it probably was perfect because whenever it was time, you guys were right there to take care of Howie, And I remember when he was at the recovery center there, the health center, whatever I don't like to call them.
The rehab center.
Yeah, the rehab center, and guys, you were always there to bring the treats for us, and we had meetings there. They'd set up. The only time I was ever allowed to talk out loud in a library was when I was at Howie's meeting at the rehab center, and nobody came in and went shh, all that kind of stuff. So wonderful time. It's great to see all the faces here and the love that's in the room. God bless y'all. God bless Howie Dickeson. Yeah, thank you. Yep.
Hi, I'm Dennis Kinderman. I'm Howie's grandson. I'm going to kind of script something out because I really didn't want to miss anything. Hi, buddy. And I wanted to kind of get up here in the early rounds so my 3-year-old back there doesn't get in any more trouble. Right, buddy? All right. All right. An old generic dinner plate slides in front of an 8-year-old boy. On it sits the blackest rye toast he had ever seen, its color enhanced a little bit by being in the toaster a little too long. Next to it sat what the boy thought looked like 2 eggs. After just waking up about 15 or 20 minutes beforehand, it wasn't exactly a welcome sight. As he stared down at his plate with a worried expression on his face, his grandfather, who sat across from him at the small 2-person dinner table, said to him, "What's the matter with you?" And I looked to my grandfather and I said to him, "These eggs are raw." He says to me, "They're not raw, they're over easy. And if you don't like them, don't eat them." So after clearing the dinner plates, my grandfather said to me, "Get your shoes on. Let's go for a ride." So after leaving, we got into his car, and he took me to Allward's to get me some cereal that I would actually eat so I wouldn't starve. And as the day progressed, after that we went to the lumber yard to pick out some board lumber, and from there we stopped to have lunch. And he took me to a little restaurant on Van Dyke Road called Valeria's. And as we went in there, the first thing that I heard was someone say to my grandfather, "Hey, Howard, how you doing?" It seemed like every place we stopped that day, my grandpa knew somebody. The grocery store, the lumber yard, Valeria's, everywhere we stopped. And I remember the restaurant the light being so low, even at 11:45 in the morning, and the dark red vinyl booths, and the waitress handed me a menu that was as tall as I was. And my grandfather said, "Do you like anchovies?" And trying not to repeat the breakfast debacle, I said with an energetic yes. So he smiled at me skeptically and said, "All right then, we'll have a pepperoni and anchovy pizza." So when the pizza came, my grandfather cut me a slice and put it in front of me, and the smell was not something that I relished. But I was determined, and I took a big bite, and it turns out I actually loved it. And that was the first of many, many pizzas we had together at Valeria's. And the first weekend that I can actually remember staying with my grandfather. And it was just me and him. And so through the years, that happened a lot. I'd go stay with him for a night or two here and there, mostly on weekends when my father was on a night shift and my mother was waitressing, when I was a young child. And, I just, from a young age, I remember the smell of old and stale coffee, the pungent aroma of Copenhagen snuff, and the many small rooms that were filled with musical instruments, bookshelves that were just overfilled with books, paints, brushes, easels, paintings everywhere, and the furniture that just really, it just itched you every time you sat on it. And then we were out in his wood shop all the time. That was our place to be. And he showed me how to use each individual tool, and he would scold me when I was doing something wrong, but he would show me how to do it the right way. And that's something that has stuck with me my entire life. And we would build jigsaw puzzles on his jigsaw, and we would build our Pinewood Derby cars there. We actually took home a ribbon the first year that we did it at our Boy Scout Pinewood Derby for most original design. Because we made the exact picture on the box that it came in. But now I have almost all of my grandfather's tools in my own shop at home in Wisconsin, and I remember recently showing him pictures, trying to show him pictures of things that I've been working on, the Christmas gifts that I gave to people this year, and he'd feel it all around, and he'd just smile, and he would just be so happy, and that made me happy, and I just know that he was proud, and then he would give me those kisses on the cheeks that were just all mustache, and my son loves them. Love them, yeah. I love the man I knew as my grandfather. Many of you, or three of you, knew him as Dad, and many of you here today knew him as Howie. And it wasn't until much later in my life that I learned how it was possible that my grandfather knew hundreds of people across the country. I didn't understand that at all. Over the course of many conversations with my grandfather and my mother, I learned of the dignitaries, Alcoholics Anonymous, and the life of my grandfather leading up to his eventual sobriety. I thank all the people present here today that helped my grandfather, that gave him the love and support that he needed every day. And so my memory of him is not that of a man suffering with a terrible disease, but that of a loving grandfather who was saved by a fellowship of spiritual living. I am so proud of this man. Not only did I learn of the love and support that he received, but the never-ending love and support he gave to so many. Through the many conversations I've had today, I can take home a little more of him with me to Wisconsin, and so I can tell his great-grandchildren as many stories and memories as possible. I love you, Grandpa. I know that you're in a better place making music, enjoying a peaceful walk, reading books, and creating beautiful paintings. Thank you.
My name is Bob Butts. I'm an alcoholic. Howie was my sponsor. I met Howie and developed a relationship in 2009. And I was wondering what I could say about Howie, relate a story, and I don't know, after what Mark was saying, and now Dennis, I do have some thoughts. I have spent a good amount of time with Howie over the years. One thing in particular comes to mind that after he became my sponsor, I got this thought about, I called it Sponsor Appreciation Day. One day a year, Howie and I would go to, he picked this place. It turned out to be a really nice place. We'd go to Marine City on Lake St. Clair, on the river, St. Clair River, and we'd have a lake perch for lunch. Howie really enjoyed that, and it was a nice dinner right on the river there. You could see the ferries going back and forth to Canada. And then I think it was last year, was the last summer, was the last time we went. And at that time, Howie was using a cane. And after lunch, we got up to leave, and as you all know, Howie just got up and started motoring along without the cane. And I went and got it, and I said, Howie, you forgot your cane. And he said, we don't call it a cane. We refer to it as a walking stick. I said, okay. So we got in the car, and we did pretty much the same thing every year. We drive about a half a block down the main street to a little city-owned park, and I'd take a couple of lawn chairs, and we'd take them down by the river, and we'd sit there under a shade tree, and we'd watch the boats go by. Sometimes a freighter or two would go by. And we'd sit there for an hour, sometimes 2 hours, and just talk about what's going on, life, the program. We both grew up on the east side of Detroit. We used to talk a lot about restaurants and places of interest that weren't there anymore, that used to be there. And it was just a real enjoyable day that Howie always looked forward to, and so did I. Before we'd leave, we'd always go across the street to a little bakery, and he'd always want to get 6 or 8 of these date bars that they had there to take home. We'd get those, and then we'd come back home. I'd bring them back to White Lake, and it was just a special time. Like I said, Howie really enjoyed it and looked forward to it, and so did I. And I'm really going to miss Howie, as I'm sure now I look at this room full of well-wishers, and I just I loved Howie, and I'm really going to miss him. And he's always going to have a special place in my heart. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name's Dennis. I'm Howie's oldest son, and the reason I'm the oldest son is because I'm the only one. I'm really blown away by what I see today. I knew he had made tremendous efforts for the last 46 years, and I remember actually the day when I was 18 years old that he finally went to his first AA meeting, and I was like, yeah. The bad part was I was off to Michigan to go to school. So it was like, why did you wait so long? You know? But anyway, as a son, I had I had many remarkable episodes with my father. But the one that I really was just so passionate about was when I was 12 years old. And I somehow became a rabid Detroit Red Wing hockey fan, and watching on a small black and white TV, and I thought, God, this is awesome. What a sport. I couldn't skate, but I thought, but I can watch. And so my dad happened to get a couple pair of tickets, and I was just so excited. Just, wow, like a 12-year-old, excited about something, like a sports event. And we were going down to the Olympia to see, that's when they had only 6 teams back then. And I knew all the players and all the teams, and it was just wonderful. But there was one obstacle, a blinding snowstorm. And it was like, if it were me right now, I would have never gone. But as a 12-year-old, you make your dad do things he didn't want to do, So he kept looking at me going, I don't know, son. It's pretty bad out there. I go, I know, but we can do it, Dad. I just know we can. And that was back before four-wheel drive and all-wheel drive, and this is where we had the 1966 red Volkswagen Bug. And so as we're driving down Van Dyke to the Olympia, you've seen cars off to the side of the road, some turned over, and I said, we can still do it. We got the Bug, Dad. We can do this. We can go. And he kept looking at me like, I'm ready to turn around anytime, son. So we got to the game, and I couldn't believe my eyes. I was just so passionate, so excited. I felt like during the first period I was levitating off my seat. And then the first intermission, I went to take, to the bathroom break, and I couldn't even pee straight. I was so excited. It was like, wow, this is amazing. So even though the Red Wings lost, I was just blown away. And then sure enough, we went to find the car, and it was halfway buried by the snowstorm, outside the Olympia. That's where nobody parked at all in the right place. Everybody was up banks and over this, but somehow the place was filled, So on the way back, there was more cars, overturned and stuff like that. And I said, we can do it, we can do it. And we got back, into our subdivision, and that's as far as we got because the snow was now this high. And somehow we barreled through. And it was just like a great memory of what a father would do for a son. When you're that passionate and you're that excited, to do that. And I'll never forget you, Dad, for that. Never forget you for that. Yes, we went to ball games and we did other things, and we took me to Lions games and all that kind of stuff. But it was just it was the one thing, the indelible impression of just me looking at him and going, come on, Dad, we can do it. And by golly, we did. And it was just an exceptional experience for a 12-year-old. And today, I'm probably blown away and more excited of what has happened. I'm not the outcast son, but I've been 40 years away from Michigan. I do come back once a year, every couple years, and to really catch up with the rest of the family. And so today, and hearing everybody who's been here today just regaling us with just tremendous stories about my dad, and it's like I loved him before, but I just love him even that much more, And so I really, on behalf of the family, just appreciate every one of you for being here and for caring that much and for being a part of his life and you being a part of his life and now a part of all of our lives. And so thank you very much for that. And just we'll have a great time tomorrow too. Okay? Thank you.
I'm Jim Fleming, alcoholic, and Howie was my sponsor in AA for over 30 years. And we have a lot of expressions in the dignitaries, one of which is that we give guidance and direction unafraid. And Howie was not afraid. And so I was a beneficiary of very much of that guidance. And I also had the privilege of giving him a ride on Thursday night the last few years that he lived on Utica Road. And because he could no longer drive at night, and his marker, he probably shouldn't be driving at all, but he'd still drive during the day some. And we played a little game because we're both very conscious of being on time, very important to us. So I would call at 8 o'clock in the morning on the dot to see if he was going that night, which almost always was. And then I'd show up at 6:40 on the dot, just for fun. And I'd go around the block a couple times if I had to just to make sure I got it right. And so a little game we play, and if I called at 8 o'clock and the line was busy, I'd call back and say, "Who's talking at 8 o'clock?" And you're waiting for my call. But we also say that we owe each other the truth as we see it and the right to be wrong. And so I want to illustrate two examples, two singular experiences I had over those years, because the one time he was wrong, I got a lot of good direction from him, and he was always right on, or damn close to it. Well, one time he was just totally off base, and I don't even remember what it was about, which is probably a part of the whole deal. But I figured 99.9%, that's pretty good batting average. I can live with that. And the other time was I got ahead of him. One time I got ahead of him, and I was married right out of college for 32 years, and my wife passed away, and I laid low for a year like they told me to, which was good advice, but then I started dating again. And I was clueless, as I found out. I thought it would be easy, but it's a long story. In fact, I used to tell people, if Howie's having a bad day and you want to make him feel good, ask him about my dating experience, That would bring a smile to his face. But I eventually did hit the jackpot again, but in the meantime, things weren't going well at all. And I called him up and said, "We got to sit down and talk about this. I don't know what's going on out there." So we did. And before we started, I said, "I want to tell you right now up front that the only consistent element in all my experiences dating is me." So I am the problem. So we got that out of the way, and we had a really good discussion about things. So one time he was wrong. One time I got ahead of him. That's not too bad. But like everyone else says, I loved him, and I'll miss him. And they broke the mold after they made him. So thank you.
My name is Benny Rediers, and I'm an alcoholic. Howie Dickeson was a dear friend and a prime example of how to be a fellow among fellows in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. I will miss him greatly, but I know he lives on in our hearts and in our meetings. Who among us hasn't heard some of his sayings repeated around the tables? How has your way been working for you? Compared to what? Did you get your drinking done? We owe each other the truth as we see it, and we owe each other the right to be wrong. Don't piss in the well that we are all drinking out of. And this is my favorite. Tell us a little bit about yourself so that we may get to know you better and so that we can be of service to you. At the St. Philip's meeting in Rochester last Saturday morning, after the message went out that Howie had passed, we had us a wonderful memorial meeting, and even the new people that never met Howie said they could really feel the strength and the power of the fellowship and the big effect that Howie had on all of us. Our friend Jason Travitz texted us and said that Howie cared more about how he was living than how he was feeling. Isn't that the truth? And isn't that a good priority to follow? Oh, we know Howie could sometimes be a curmudgeon, but we also have seen him be extremely loving, caring, and welcoming. I remember a woman that walked into a meeting in Rochester. She was the only woman in the room, and when she spoke, she couldn't stop crying. I will never forget the care and the love and the compassion that Howie showed that woman. Howie had a knack for making newcomers feel welcome. It didn't matter if you were a guy or a woman, if you were old or if you were half his age, if you were rich and had a nice job, or if you were poor and lived on the streets. Howie cared about you, treated you with respect, and opened up the fellowship to you. Howie also taught me about honesty. He showed me that it's okay to talk about things that I'm afraid of or angry about. He was pretty vocal about his fear of getting older and about his anger at all his ailments and the things he couldn't do anymore. If Howie was not afraid to talk about this after 30 or 40 or 46 years of sobriety, then certainly I don't have to be either. I am sure Howie is sitting at a table somewhere in heaven, having a meeting with other greats such as Jim St. Amand, Red Canuck, and Monty Cross. I'm sure they found a coffee pot somewhere in heaven, and I'm sure there's still a few resentments left in heaven too. And lastly, let us not be sad about our loss, but instead let us honor Howie. Let us be on time at meetings, or we'll point to our watch when you walk in late. Let's observe silence and show respect and listen when How It Works is read, because Howie would get pretty torqued when people would screech their chairs or catch up on their pleasantries during the readings. Let's read How It Works with confidence and gusto. And let's always be a mover and a shaker. When someone shows up that you haven't seen before, get out of your seat, move over, and shake their hand. Our friend Howie is not gone. He will be with us around the tables for a very, very long time, and he will be in our hearts forever. Thank you.
I'm John Wigan, and I'm an alcoholic. And I asked Howie to be my sponsor in 1994, and he's been that for a long time. The thing that impressed me about Howie is when he would talk about, he would pray, and he would say, "God, please save me from my anger." And we talked often about what a demon anger was, and and he would talk about it, the way that it affected his life, and he would talk about the 12 steps that he had to take to diminish that thing in his life. When I first came into this area in 1990, I met Howie in the fall of 1990 down at the Senior Citizen Center, and I was going through the end of a 25-year marriage at the time, and I was having a very, very tough time. And Howie talked to me about what it was like for him to make some of the tough decisions that he had to make in his life. And he talked about the fact that it wasn't all about him. He talked about the fact that he had a wife, an ex-wife, children to serve, and be the dad and be the best person he could
where he had not fulfilled all of his duties up through that point. And he knew the burden well. And he was very determined to not do that anymore. He encouraged me. When I came in here, I was angry, lonely, desperate, and I thought honestly that this was a permanent condition that would never leave me. I was going to die with this stuff going on in my life. And Howie was one of those guys. He was just one of the guys, because there were several of them that would say things like, "We're going to laugh at you until you can learn how to laugh at yourself." And he helped me to not, and he would encourage me to not take myself so damn seriously all the time, and to lighten up. I love the way that he was with me when I was going through the struggles that I went through to learn how to grow up and be a father, be an ex-husband, be a husband, and all those things that you would think that a person would have learned before they reached the age of 45 or 50. And I fought that growing up process for an awful lot of years. And I would ultimately end up sitting down and he and I would talk. But what he would talk about is his experience with the struggle of trying to be a better person. And he would talk with honesty about his anger and how it seemed like it would overwhelm him sometimes, and how he would have to approach the God of his understanding for some relief. And he found that in Alcoholics Anonymous. And he taught me he encouraged me to apply the steps to what was going on in my life. And the answer was always in the steps. It was always there. And all I had to do was look for it and be willing to go ahead and do those things that went against what I thought and the way I felt. And to just trust this process that we have learned over the years in this room. I traveled in the field of endeavor that I've taken on over the years. I traveled all over the country, and Howie would always make sure that I was hooked up with somebody wherever I was going. I just walked in the door here a few minutes ago, and the guy that he sent me to in New York, on Long Island, was standing at the door. And there's so many names. There's guys from New York, there's guys from Florida, there's guys from Wisconsin, there's guys from all over Chicago and Ohio. And and I'm so grateful for those times, because I would get out and away from the dignitaries, that group that we had here, that we still have here. And I have an awful tendency to go back to what I know, which is how to be lonely and isolate and do all that stupid stuff that will ultimately cause me a lot of misery. So Howie knew that, and he would say, "Hey, call so-and-so. Go find out where he's going to a meeting and ask if you can go with him." And that was the advice that I had started getting in 1990. Go see that group of guys over there and ask them where they're going to have coffee, and invite you and ask if you can go with them. He encouraged me to reach out. He was a mover and a shaker. He was, like Benny said, the guy that got out of his chair and he said, "Move your ass across the floor and stick your hand out to the next guy coming in the door." And that's that's the way to stay sober, and that's the way to make your life fuller. I'm so grateful to have all of you guys that are in this room. And to be a dignitary means a lot to me today. And it's not the "I'm better than thou" thing that so many folks get it confused with. But it's a sense of
living with purpose. It's a sense of living honestly. It's a sense of doing the simple things like being on time. And some days, just don't be an asshole. And for guys like me, that's a tough deal some days. I'm grateful that you guys are here, and thank you so much for Howie, and thank you for his family. You guys have been so tremendous, and you know, when he first moved over into the house over there in White Lake, I thought it was going to kill him, and you know, and I remember going over and sitting and talking with him, and why don't we having a meeting here at your house? And he damn near chased me out the door because I was an idiot. But then something changed, and he started making some phone calls, and the next thing I know, we're having a Tuesday night meeting at Howie's. And I know that served him a whole lot better than it served any of us, because it made a difference. So thank you all. Thank you for being a wonderful family to that guy. I loved it. I appreciate it.
My name is Don Cowles. I'm an alcoholic. Howie has been my friend for 32, almost 33 years. And we discovered early on that we had gone to the same, what they called then a intermediate school, Jackson Intermediate in Detroit, East Side school. We were 10 years apart, but we had the same shop teacher. We had the same band leader. We started out with some pretty neat stuff in common. When Howie got to 20 years of sobriety, we had a party for him in my garage. My garage, because it was sort of looking like it might rain. Red and Doc Jerry came from Lansing. We had a bunch of folks from around here, and we had, believe it or not, a French chef, baker, who was in the program in Rochester, used to go to St. Philip's at noon and sit and talk with us. His name was Pascal. He baked a beautiful cake for Howie. So we enjoyed that. Now I have to transition forward quite a few years. For the last, 8 or 10 years, Howie and I have ridden together to an annual retreat up in Port Austin. And Howie, in the passenger seat, had the seatbelt strapped across his shoulder, and it dug into his neck. He got a little frosted. He said, "I wish we could do something about that." I have a wooden clothespin on the vent on my dashboard right now. Howie would pull that street seatbelt over and clip the clothespin to his shirt, and then it wouldn't bother him anymore. That clothespin is going to stay in my car. It's there. It's going to remind me of Howie every time I get in my vehicle and go anywhere. Hello. I am so grateful to have known him and loved him and been loved back. It's a joy. And I thank you guys so much for all you've done for him. That's all I got. Thank you.
I'm Bruce McDonald. I met Howie in Alcoholics Anonymous in 1983. I've been sober a little less than a year. And I was aware of Howie because people would talk about him. And what they'd say was, "I don't know how the heck that guy stays sober. He's just mean, and he talks, and he sells booze for a living. It's crazy. He's got to quit doing that. He can't possibly stay sober doing that stuff, So I was getting tired of hearing about how you can't do this and you mustn't do that and you have to do this, and I can't walk around in eggshells all my life, So I thought I'd go ask Howie, because well, he's 10 years sober too, so, that was the thing that amazed people, is that he stayed sober that long, even though he was doing everything wrong, according to them. And so I went and asked him. I said, well, I heard you sell booze. He says, yeah. I says, well, how do you stay sober and sell booze? He says, I was wondering about that too, and I asked my sponsor, and he told me, he says, Howie, they're paying you to sell it, not to drink it. I thought, well, I can understand something. I can understand that. I could understand that. And so we got to be friends. We discovered we had a lot of interests in common. And the sponsor I had at the time, Danny O'Brien, he, Jim remembers, and but he started getting, he got dementia, and I still go talk to him, but it wasn't doing me much good anymore, And so then I got Howie for my sponsor, and he's been my sponsor ever since. And one of the things that Howie could always do is that I'd call him up and I'd share with him how upset I was with myself because I wasn't living up to my own standards, And then he was not the least bit afraid to share his own frailties with me, and I was just thinking about it. The seatbelt thing reminded me of this. This is maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I live in a resort town now, and in the summertime it's infested with tourists, and they're all drunk by 11 o'clock in the morning. And I was visiting a friend in town, and I was trying to leave, and there was this drunken tourist blocking the driveway, and I became very angry with the fellow. As a matter of fact, the thought crossed my mind for a second. I was going to jump out of my truck and drag him out of his car, and then I thought, I'm a little too old for that. The thought passed quickly, but but I was upset with myself. I mean, I just felt kind of, so I called Howie as soon as I got a chance, and I told him about this. He says, Bruce, he says, my daughter drives me around. He says, I can't see what's going on, but a while back she told me, she says, Dad, that guy just flipped me off. He says, and I wanted to get out of the car and kick his ass, but I can't get the seatbelt off by myself. So, and we both laughed at ourselves. He was able to laugh at himself, and it made it easier for me to laugh at myself, and that's just one of the many things that, I want to thank you, Jeannie, for opening your home to us. It's so wonderful, so that opportunity I had to sit with Howie for a few hours on Friday, it means a lot to me, and thank you so much, and that's about all I got to say. I just, Howie's been a big, important part of my life for a long time. I've called him every Sunday morning, at 9 o'clock in the morning, Sunday morning, and like Jim, I'll wait, I'll go get another cup of coffee while I'm waiting for it to turn 9, so I can call right at 9. And for a long time I've done that, for a long time, and I'm going to miss that a lot. So that's all I got. Thank you.
I have to write. I'm not as good as you guys are. I had to write it all down. My name is JoJo. My husband Norb, we're both the Boses. And I'm April's godmother, Jeannie's daughter's godmother, and a proud one, however, too. And I just wanted to say a few words. It was about 30 years ago when I first met Jeannie's dad. I called him Howard back then. And he was sitting at Bill and Jeannie's kitchen table for dinner. Come to find out, he was a wine salesman and knew a ton of stuff about wine and sales and people. We had many laughs about Italians and Sicilians, and he knew most Italians thought that they were not Sicilians. I'm Sicilian. So we had a lot of laughs about that, and he knew the difference. He said, come to find out, he knew a lot of stuff over the years. Howard was well-versed on a lot of matters. He was extremely well-read and had many conversations with my husband, Norb, about books and sports and politics. Politics, yeah. His mind was always sharp and opinionated. He was a man of strength. It really didn't matter what our conversations were about. We just loved listening to his stories. What knowledge. His hand-on experience is a wonderful artist, which I'm lucky to say we have a piece of his art in our kitchen. He could call matters of geology and, of course, stories from long, long ago. It was all good. I remember the last day I said to him, he was resting, and I put my hands on top of his hands, and he woke. And he looked up and he said, Jojo, I know you, I know you. And it was always good. He always warmed my heart. Dad, as I came to call him, and I had a thing, you know. He loved Italian food, and when it came to cannolis, he was speechless. I remember telling him, no matter what Jeannie tells you, cannolis are what's going to make you better, not to listen to his daughter at all. Some days in the past 5 years, he stayed with Bill and Jeannie. He'd get rambunctious, you know, frustrated too. Several months ago, I came to visit and found him sitting up on the couch with both legs wraps, you know, those thingies to get rid of water and all. And he used to accumulate quite a bit. Jeannie, the best nurse practitioner we know this side of the Mississippi, would encourage these sittings, but to no avail, he would fight them. And I leaned over toward him and I said, Dad, you know that Jeannie can be a real pain in the, I guess I can say ass, everybody else. But I believe she's trying to keep you alive. He goes, I know. Anyone staying at the Kinderman's home for more than one day, to us, it would be like a vacation. So welcoming and warm and friendly and always way too much food. It was difficult for us to realize 5 years had already passed. During that time, we witnessed Jeannie never stopping to care for Dad, making sure he had every need and desire was fulfilled. Besides her faith, I look back now and I believe she got a lot of her strength from her dad. A never-ending, caregiving daughter who made life a very happy one. There is a special place in heaven for caregivers, and Jeannie and Bill's hearts, and Nancy and Mary Mom and his kids and grandkids should feel free of any doubts, especially you, Jeannie. They did everything right. We call them St. Jeannie and St. Bill. Dad blessed me by adopting me and my husband into their family. He was a blessed man, and he knew this. And we did too. And we will miss him a great deal. Thank you.
My name's Kyle Kayberry. I'm not waiting for the cancer. I'm selling the truck and moving in with Bill and Jeannie. I'm glad I'm here today. When I first started trucking, every single day was an I Love Lucy episode. And my attitude wasn't very good. And Mark and Howie answered every phone call. They never not answered the phone. They never not had time for me when I needed it. I'll never forget that. That's an important item for us people. And God bless him for letting me into his life. I'm better for it. I remember many things about Howie, all of them good. One of them is he walked with enthusiasm. He had that walk about him, and it screamed enthusiasm. And we had a lot of good times together. And I'm glad to be here, and I don't have much else to say other than thanks.
I'm Bob Sheldon. I'm an alcoholic. Been a member and a fellow with Howie and learned about fellowship from Howie. First, I'd like to thank Howie for making his decision 46 years ago and sticking to it, which is a big thing for him, you know. And he was there when I stumbled in, like a lot of other guys, okay? And there was a bunch of us that were pretty young. We're kind of old now. And a lot of them are here. Howie was Howie was a character in a cast of characters, okay? And those characters, I thought, stayed up at night plotting on how to make my life miserable. And there might have been some truth in that, because I can ask some of these other guys and they'd kind of feel the same way. But they were passionate and serious about what they had to say. And they were relentless in encouraging us to be, beyond our fears. And wanted us to go as far as we could. And they were always there to check on us and make sure that we were still moving along. Now, unlike a lot of guys in here who met Howie in their first meetings and that kind of stuff, I met Howie across the bar because I was a bar manager in East Lansing at this place called Frankenstein, and Howie was the liquor salesman. Now, in those days, and it may still be this way, in Michigan, I was responsible for turning in the order, and you had to turn the order into the Michigan Liquor Control Commission, which made selling pretty hard. So Howie would say, "Is your car door open?" You'd go out there and there'd be a couple of bottles on the seat, that kind of stuff. Howie was persistent, and I, 2 years later, because I met, I met Howie at about 46 years ago, okay? And then I stumbled into the meetings in East Lansing 2 years later, and he's been there ever since for me, along with others. And the message that Howie had was well crafted, born in fellowship, and passed on. And we have that are still here and remaining. That's our duty now. And he was a standard bearer to many. I was fortunate in that, 30-some years ago, there was a committee. It was Howie and Chris Marlin, and they decided that I should host the meeting in Detroit because they didn't want it at their house. And I was single and waffling around, and Howie was just, when people would say his name, you pictured him immediately. Okay? You didn't have to say anything else. You saw him. And you heard him. There was nothing more daunting than going to the Brown County retreat and ending up in the barrel with Howie at the edge of his chair, along with his other buddies. But again, that was about getting beyond the fears that were stopping us from doing what we wanted to do. And and they kept us motivated. And so he's just a big part of so many people, and their success and their story that's still going on. So, thanks.
My name's Tom Hutt, and Howie is a good friend of mine. I met Howie just short of 30 years ago. Now, Howie's 30 years my senior, okay? You wouldn't think that two guys on that kind of age spectrum would have a whole lot in common. But Howie was a special guy, you know. And we became very, very good friends. Now, let me get a survey. How many people in this room had a special bond with Howie? Raise your hand. So, I thought I was the only one.
You're in the right place.
Yeah. I thought, you know, what we got is special, but it was special, you know. It was truly special with everybody, because he was a unique guy. You know, I bumped into this older gentleman in AA, and he was from Canada. His name was Wilford Whitfield, and he was at the first meeting in Windsor, in Canada. In fact, in Canada, and he got sober coming across the border over to Detroit, because there was meetings there, but there wasn't any in Canada at that time. And so anyways, apparently in Canada, it's a tradition that if it's your birthday, your anniversary, that you can invite your speaker. You can choose somebody to come speak. So Wilford asked me, he says, do you got anybody you could recommend? I have, you know, he was like, he died when just short of 50 years sober. And he said, do you have somebody? I said, yeah, I got this good friend of mine, Howie. He can talk. And so Wilford invited him over to do an open talk over in Canada. And Howie said when he crossed the border, when he got up to the booth, they asked him, are you bringing anything into the country? And he said, I am. He said, I'm carrying a message. That probably wouldn't fly nowadays at the border. But that's what he did. He carried the message to a lot of guys, and I'm forever grateful. I'm grateful that we had the opportunity to hang out at the house. I'm grateful that you drove him down on Thursdays to the meeting, as long as he could physically do it, you know. I'm grateful that he spoke at our anniversary dinner this last year, and guys that maybe didn't know him that well, that weren't, maybe came in after he was physically not able to attend that meeting, got to hear his message, and so I'm grateful to know him, and he's gonna stay in my heart forever. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Chris Marlin. I met Howie 45 years ago, and we got sober together. What an important thing. And here's what I want to say. When I first met him, I didn't have a car, I didn't have a driver's license, I didn't have a job. I was living in a motel room. And when I first was introduced, they said, you got to meet Howie. He's a liquor salesman. And I remember secretly thinking to myself, you know, if it doesn't work out for me, he'd be a pretty terrific guy to know. But the other thing is, Bob mentioned that we were all young. There's a whole bunch of us here that were like in our mid-20s when we came to AA. And we were all sitting around one time kind of talking, because Howie had a job, right? He had a family. You know, he's established in life. None of us were established. We didn't have anything. So I remember we were sitting around talking one day. Well, we can't quite relate, right? Because we don't have nothing. And I remember him saying, well, you know, we're all about 6 years old emotionally. And that was true. So from then on, we were all okay. But I have seen Howie. I moved away a long time ago. I moved a lot of different places. But I've seen him in New York several times. I've seen him in Florida, Key West, Indiana. How many times in Michigan, the old retreats over in Holland. I would see him in all these retreats down in Indiana. And it was always good, because here's the thing that I think he stood for more than anything: fellowship. The group that I belong to, the Dignitary Sympathy Group, is all about fellowship. And it's staying connected no matter what. And I could tell you, I know for a fact that Howie could give it pretty good. In fact, we were at a meeting once here in Detroit, and it was on the 6th step. We have these steps in AA. Some guy starts muddling through it, and Howie looked at him and he says, well, what is the step 6? Well, the guy didn't know because he never read it. So anyway, we had this great meeting about, you know, he was going to learn all about that step. But here's what you needed to know. He would give good advice, and if you were hurting, you'd get a call later that night. How you doing? You okay? I'm thinking of you. And there can't be anything more important than the fellowship that we all have here. And he was such an integral part of that. And I'll just tell you that my life's better because of that, man. Thanks.
I'm Dan LaFave. I'm an alcoholic. Howie and I met in 1972 in June. I had been in the fellowship about 6 months, and we had a lot to share. How you doing, Danny? How you doing with this sobriety stuff? I said, the best I can, Howie. Well, you don't look too good. And we kept talking and hanging with it and talking and hanging with it, and I'll tell you, it was invaluable. Now, he was a conduit for a lot of people throughout the years, but when we got started without each other, I don't think we would have been there and stayed with it. And we gave to each other, and we gave to others that came in with us, you know. And that was important to me. And he always called me Danny. I don't know why that was his deal. I remember when he called Ron Stevenson Ronnie one time, that didn't go over real well at all. Stevenson got up on his haunches on that one. But, you know, you got to remember the depth, I think, of how he cared. And what I thought was most signature about Howie Dickeson was he always extended to a new person. If he went to a retreat and there was somebody he didn't know, he made the move. He crossed the room and he shook the guy's hand, and then he did his best to remember that person's name, okay, throughout the retreat. And he hung with that. He had a memory like an elephant as far as names of people in the fellowship. And I want to thank Jeannie, you know, because I know the depth of love that she had for her father. And that was so evident as you took him into your home, and how he appreciated that. Now, I know there were moments when he could express himself in a manner that did not seem that he was appreciating it very much. However, he loved you, and thank God he had you. Thanks.
Hi there, I'm Jill Kinderman, Dennis's wife. Ever since I knew Howie, he was incredibly proud and supportive. The first time Dennis brought me over there, I was a second-year veterinary student at Michigan State University, and from that time I was always Dr. Jill. Anytime I saw him for the next 10 years, Dr. Jill. He was always so proud to talk about all of my accomplishments and all of his veterinary friends and lots of stories. And I always thought part of that was our shared bond of being a Michigan State Spartan fan. You know, anytime, he was always asking us to bring back memorabilia and hats. Every time I came over to the house, he was wearing that Michigan State hat, watching a Michigan State game, and if he was, by chance, watching a Michigan game, I just presumed, like any Michigan State fan, you're watching it to watch them lose. And I don't exactly remember the story that Dennis and I were talking about that I just said, oh, your grandpa is probably so upset. And he's like, why? I was like, Michigan won, or Michigan State lost, or something along those lines. And Dennis, with kind of a look of pity and explanation, said, no, he's a Michigan fan. I said, what? He said, do you know that 2 of his children went to Michigan and that he's a diehard Michigan fan? And part of my soul just broke, but at the same time, it made me love him even more. Because even then, every time I saw him, he was wearing that Michigan State hat, watching a Michigan State game, asking me how Michigan State Veterinary School was going. And that's the man and the grandpa that I knew. A proud, supportive, maybe a little bit of a liar, and a misguided Michigan fan. But either way, we loved him very much, and we'll miss you, Grandpa. I have to go out to my child who's probably terrorizing my van now.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bob Deasy, and I'm one of the gang. I'm an alcoholic. God, there's so many good things to say and think about Howie. What I remember, the feeling I always got from Howie was his arms were always wide open with love and friendship and greeting, you know. He was a man who was and is well loved with everybody I know. Florida, New York, of course the Midwest here, Indiana, Michigan, God, Texas, California, New Mexico, Arizona. Everybody loves Howie. Everybody loves Howie because his arms are always wide open with love, the way I experienced them. And I met him early too, and I was 26, Michigan State, and smart ass from New York, and didn't know my butt from a hole in the wall, and I thought he was a pretty good guy to get to know. He was a liquor salesman, and my family was in the liquor business in New York, so I figured, oh, this is a good guy to listen to, and he'll understand why I love to drink, and maybe he could find a loophole for me, understanding that I'm first generation Irish, and we owned Irish pubs in Brooklyn, that he would understand that and say, hey, it's okay to have a little bit, But that never happened. I remember Howie from Red's apartment, first time I'd met him. And I just remember all the love that man had in him, And he was going through a tough time when I met him. A very tough time. And but gosh, he knew how to express something that made you feel better all the time. Always felt better. Always felt better after meeting Howie and listening to Howie. And I'm not alone with that. I'm originally from New York, but I live in Florida now, and we have a dignitaries meeting in Florida. And whenever we have a retreat, all they want to know about is how we're going to be there. And I know there's a retreat in New York, and what they ask about is how we coming to the retreat in New York. And it's just incredible that one human being can have such a loving impact on so many people in such a positive way. I'll never forget him. My wife will never forget him. The love and caring that he showed. He would visit us in Florida with a bunch of the guys on a regular basis, and he would stay at my house occasionally, and he would always ask my wife, Tammy, how you doing? Tammy, how you doing? The love that he would show her, and she loved Tammy as much as probably most of us did, and had a special place in her heart, for sure. One funny quick story about Howie. He came down with a bunch of the guys to Florida back in the early 90s, and we went to a restaurant by the Intracoastal Waterway, and Howie wanted to buy lunch. He wanted to treat everybody to lunch. So we got a hold of the waiter and said to the waiter, tell him his card is no good. So Howie was feeling really good that he was gonna treat everybody to lunch, and the waiter came over and tapped him on the shoulder. Said, Howie, I'm sorry, but this card is no good. Howie, he turned white. Oh, he was so upset that he couldn't treat the guys to lunch. And then we all laughed. We all laughed and said, Howie, it's okay, it's a joke. And the waiter came over and patted him on the back and said it was just okay too. And we had a grand time that day. But he always, those arms wide open with love. If God's love is expressed in human beings, it's certainly expressed in Howie. Thank you.
Every word we heard tonight was wonderful from all over. I mean, the connection that all of you have with our dad, and we can't be more proud and feel more blessed to have him, to have had him. And it is true. There were some difficult times. It wasn't all, wonderful, but it was the right thing to do, and we benefited from him as much as he benefited from us. So this concludes the speaking tonight. We have probably about another 10-15 minutes to say goodbye to each other, along with my brother and my sister and myself and our families. We hope that all of you can be with us tomorrow morning. My dad's funeral is at 11 o'clock at St. Patrick Church, and he will lie in state there at 10 o'clock, and then there will be a luncheon to follow. So anybody here tonight who has not signed the booklet for the luncheon, please do, so we can try to get a decent count anyway. And so thank you so much. We hope to say goodbye to all of you tonight. Thanks.